Story 1, The House of Endless Whispers. The road to Blackwood Manor was a serpentine trail of cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds, winding through a dense forest that swallowed all traces of daylight. Richard Halstead tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles paling as he navigated the treacherous path. The sky, bruised with shades of purple and gray, hung ominously above, warning of the storm that loomed ever closer. Blackwood Manor had stood for nearly 2 centuries, its skeletal frame looming against the skyline like a silent sentinel of forgotten nightmares. Richard had inherited the estate upon his uncle's mysterious death, though he barely remembered the man. The letter from the solicitor had been curt, the house was his, but the land came with a warning: never remain inside past midnight. A crack of thunder rattled the sky as Richard pulled into the long-abandoned driveway. Vines twisted hungrily around the columns of the entrance, and the great oak doors groaned as he pushed them open. Dust swirled in the stagnant air, disturbed by his presence. He stepped inside and froze. Somewhere within the house, a whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind, but there was no breeze within the suffocating stillness. The sound was soft, almost beckoning, and it seemed to seep from the very walls. Richard swallowed and moved deeper inside. The house had been untouched for decades. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes following him as he moved. A massive chandelier hung above the grand staircase, its crystals dulled by years of neglect. But it was the whispers that unsettled him most. They ebbed and flowed, sometimes hushed, sometimes urgent, like voices trying to pierce the veil between worlds. That night, as the clock in the hall struck 12, the whispers turned to murmurs, then voices, then screams. Richard sat upright in bed, cold sweat clinging to his skin. The bedroom door creaked open, though no one was there. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, shifting and writhing as if something unseen stirred within them. He reached for the lamp, but before his fingers touched the switch, the whispers surged all around him. Leave, before it's too late. A guttural growl followed, low and inhuman. The air thickened, pressing against his chest like unseen hands. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape. But as he reached the threshold, something cold wrapped around his wrist. A hand, skeletal, rotting, dragging him back into the dark. The next morning, the manor stood silent once more, its secrets buried within its walls, waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to enter. Story 2, The Reflection That Wasn't Mine. The antique mirror arrived with no return address. Delicate, Victorian, and adorned with intricate silver filigree, it was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Evelyn Sinclair placed it against the wall of her bedroom, admiring the way it caught the light. But as she gazed at her reflection, a chill crept up her spine. Her reflection was wrong. At first, it was subtle. A blink that took a second too long. A twitch of the lips that she hadn't made. But soon, the discrepancies became undeniable. One evening, as she removed her earrings, the reflection did not move at all. Paralyzed, Evelyn watched as her mirror self slowly smiled. She stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the reflection remained motionless for a breath too long before mimicking her panic. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress. But the next night, the reflection reached toward her when she hadn't moved at all. Terror rooted her in place. The hand pressing against the glass wasn't hers. It was colder, paler, almost translucent. Then the mouth of her double moved, forming words she could not hear. "Let me out." Evelyn screamed and covered the mirror with a bedsheet. But even then, she felt it watching her. The weight of unseen eyes pressed against her sanity, fraying the edges of her mind. The whispers began soon after. Soft at first, then insistent. "Let me out. "Let me out! Let me out!" One night, she awoke to find the bedsheet crumpled on the floor. The mirror stood uncovered, and in its surface, her reflection was missing. A sound, like fingernails against glass, scraped the air. Slowly, dreading what she would see, Evelyn turned back to the mirror. A shadow loomed behind her reflection. It wasn't her shadow. Frozen in terror, Evelyn tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The reflection began to shift, its limbs distorting unnaturally, elongating, as if something inside the glass was trying to push its way through. The whispering turned into an urgent, unearthly chant. "I see you. I see you. I see you." Then, with a crack, the glass shattered outward. Shards flew across the room, and through the broken mirror, a pale hand emerged, gripping the edge of the frame. Then another. A face followed, hers, but not hers. The eyes were empty, soulless voids, and its grin stretched too wide. Evelyn screamed, scrambling away as the creature pulled itself into her world, its movements jerky, unnatural. She reached for the door, but it slammed shut before she could escape. The last thing she saw before the world went black was her own face, twisted into a monstrous smile, reaching for her. The next morning, Evelyn's neighbors heard nothing from her apartment. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually, her landlord entered with a spare key, expecting to find an empty room. Instead, he found the mirror, pristine, hanging exactly where she had placed it. And in its surface, a woman stared back. She looked like Evelyn. But her eyes begged for help. Story 3, The Whispering Crypt. Beneath the crumbling ruins of St. Agatha's Monastery lay a crypt untouched for centuries. Tobias Grayson, historian obsessed with forgotten lore, had spent years tracing its location. The legend spoke of a doorway to the afterlife, sealed away after the monks began hearing voices calling from the dark. The entrance was hidden beneath a collapsed altar, its stone door marked with carvings of twisted faces frozen in silent screams. Tobias pried it open, his lantern casting flickering shadows as he descended the narrow stairs. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. At the bottom, he found rows of ancient sarcophagi. His breath hitched when he noticed something strange. The lids were not carved with names, but instead bore warnings. "Do not wake them. Do not listen." Ignoring the words, Tobias pressed forward, his footsteps echoing. Then, the whispering began. It slithered through the crypt, a dozen voices speaking at once, pleading, promising, threatening. The lids of the sarcophagi rattled as unseen forces pressed against them. Tobias turned to flee, but the stone door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The whispering grew louder, rising into a dreadful, inhuman wail. Tobias backed into a corner, gripping his lantern as the sarcophagi lids began to shift. A skeletal hand emerged from the nearest tomb. A voice, hollow and ancient, whispered, "You should not have come." The last thing Tobias saw was a sea of sunken, empty eyes staring at him as the crypt swallowed his scream. Days later, when the monastery ruins were disturbed again, there was no sign of Tobias. Only a new sarcophagus, freshly carved, with a new warning. Do not wake him. Do not listen.